My name is Andrews. I'm the Hierophant of the Church of Witchcraft, and essentially I'm here just to make sure things don't go too far off the rails, but also the clergy help keep me on the rails as well, so there are always checks and balances, of which we always need in our world. I practice celestial witchcraft in my own practice, so you'll see some of the accoutrement on my altar here. You see some of the celestial symbols here, and I work primarily with planets, astrology on steroids, that kind of stuff is what I work on. I also work a lot with portals, gateways, and thresholds in combination. Thank you to everybody here who's with us tonight, as well as anybody who's watching us in the future on whatever platform that might be. Who knows if YouTube exists anymore? Then whatever platform you're on, thank you for watching that. Life does not have a manual, as we all, unfortunately, probably have experienced in our own existences. We never really know what it is we need to do in our existence. Nobody's given us a specific roadmap to go with, and so that can make things very challenging. No matter what era we're in, there's always difficulties around them, whether they be social, political, personal. There's always something going on. Everybody has experienced these throughout all of human history, and so nobody had an instruction, and we just sort of muddled our way through. Witchcraft is a method that we can respond to that. We can do this proactively or reactively, and this helps us at least gain some direction in our lives, some understanding. Occult practices can be the lantern in the dark for us. Anything that falls within the divination category or spellcraft, all of those things can provide some direction, some solace as well. Now, how is witchcraft a beacon unto itself? There are barriers in our life that we experience. We have stagnation, implacability, when we're not really happy or satisfied with things. There's definite uncertainty in our lives. It also can lead to lacking confidence in our own lives and our approaches to those, as well as changes in our life, big phase changes. Personally, for me, none of these necessarily have to be negative, but for me and Gwen as well, we just recently had our hand fasting, and so huge phase changes with no concept of like what that future is going to be like. So witchcraft can be a guide for that. One of the rituals that Gwen and I do during the new year is to have a joint tarot card reading. And that gives us some perspective of what we're doing and how our two lives kind of come together for the next coming year. And this is one example of how witchcraft can act as a beacon, and specifically with divination. All of these things, these barriers, the stagnation, your dissatisfaction, uncertainty in life with whatever it might be, these are all confounding factors in our lives. And confounding factors can seriously lead to some unfortunate consequences or a lot of frustration and not getting where you want to go. And so the question really is, what can be done from that perspective of these kinds of barriers that we experience? So again, witchcraft can act as this beacon for us. If we don't address these challenges in our lives, these kinds of uncertain places in our lives, then it can lead to listlessness, kind of a feeling of that I don't really know what I want to do, where I want to go, that kind of thing. It may interrupt our habits, whether that's our practice with witchcraft, it could be how we interact at work. It can lead to all these kinds of breakdowns in our own life if we don't address those challenges for ourselves. Some of those examples of being unaddressed is whenever, take an example for one of the people that was talking earlier today in this very sermon, right before it, talking about almost giving up on witchcraft because not seeing the results that were coming that he wanted to search for. And that can lead to those interrupted practices and not wanting to continue. In my own life, if I don't address my consistent practice and I'm not engaging with my witchcraft itself, then there's definitely a stagnation in my own practice. I don't access the liminal like we all do for my own purposes, for each of our own purposes. And that is those kinds of interrupted habits. And interrupting those can be really challenging. Imagine your daily rituals, whatever those might be. Not necessarily witchcraft, but how you wake up and how you put your pants on and how you go and brush your teeth and whatever sequence that looks like. Those being interrupted is challenging because that kind of gives us this throughput, this understanding of this rhythm to our lives. And this is specifically why I think that in Kabbalistic practices, specifically the Kybalion, they talk about rhythm as one of the principles within that. And rhythm to me is not just in sound, but rhythm is in practice, rhythm as in dealing with these habits and having these established pillars in our lives. Rhythm can be the number of people that are in your life, the way you interact with them, your family, your friends, acquaintances, work accomplices, that kind of thing. All of those lead to this rhythm in your life of how you kind of go through your day to day. And if you don't have that and you have those unaddressed, it can really lead to a lot of uncertainty. So when we're not connected to anything, whether it's internally or externally, we end up with this kind of frayed nerve thing and we get a lot of frustration in our lives. However, if we do manage to address these barriers that exist in our life, then it can lead to sense of fulfillment. It can lead to progression in our lives, or even solace. Some of these things are not necessarily, I struggle a little bit with my own sort of, I'm bumping up against my own Western indoctrination. I was raised in the West. So because of that, my idea of this kind of addressing these things gets us to progress and forward movement. But that's not necessarily the only thing that indicates success. Just being solace, just feeling that, being at peace in the state that you're at is its own form of success. Neither is better than the other, but they certainly lend two very different kind of feelings to it. And I wanted to make sure to capture that progress is not necessarily the indication of success, either on its own or in conjunction with something. Just being able to be peaceable and enjoy your life, whatever that looks like, is a form of success. And I think too often that specifically the Western people who live in the West, who have that kind of reference, tend to think of this consistent drive and expansion, which isn't a requisite for your solace. Some examples of that fulfillment is manifestation. I'm standing in that manifestation as one example. So here we are standing in this chapel, you're watching this thing, and this came directly from the manifestations between Gwen and I going into trying to get a home and all of that stuff. And our two energies, our magic that we put together accidentally, independently, and then it just sort of amplified, and then we ended up here. The house, this purchase took 45 days from start to finish. That includes jobs and everything. And so it was a massive amount of manifestation that happened. And so fulfillment can come quickly and suddenly, much like if you think of the tower in the Tarot, right? Tower and death having kind of different takes on change. Tower being a calamitous kind of a change, whereas death is kind of this gentle metamorphic change. Both may have crucial phase changes in them. But if you see these things, don't worry about it. When I see the tower, I just know that there's going to be a lot of very sudden change. Now, the house situation was absolutely a tower situation. It was calamitous, it was furious paced, and we got here. But fulfillment can look like this. Fulfillment can also just be an easy thing that you've been trying to do. It doesn't have to be these grand gestures. Whatever that scale is for you is relevant to the individual. Progression is one thing that I look for in my life, but I also am finding some peaceableness in the solace as well and trying to maintain that. If you want a fun phrase, don't harsh your mellow. It's okay just to be mellow and enjoy it. It is not a skill that I possess, and it is not one that is not well practiced, I shall say. So in my own life, finding that peace, that at rest solace space is challenging. And so because I know that, I am aiming towards experiencing that and really just sitting in the accomplishment, in the manifestation, because from there we can radiate outwards to others. Wouldn't it be nice if you had these things in your life? And I'm sure you've experienced various levels, and you're not going to have all one is going to be together. Everything is successful. It's a messy life. You're going to have some that are successful, some that are not, and you're going to have them at different times, at the same time, and it's going to vary widely. But it's nice when you have some sort of anchor, some sort of roadmap, some sort of beacon like witchcraft can provide. I really take solace in that because without without that kind of stability, without that direction, I really feel unmoored. And I have talked about this before in my own self that when I don't practice, I don't feel fulfilled and I don't get the sense of peace that I generally have in my own life. I don't get that perspective that comes with that place of solace. How does it feel when you get to take something off of your plate? Either you've accomplished something and finished something, or if you don't have to stress about anything anymore. There is a lot of sickness in our societies, no matter where it is, who it is, what it's with. But there is sickness of mind, of body, of opinion, of everything. And there are all these kinds of situations that we get that can be kind of perverse. But taking one of those worries off, some of those limitations of what our expectations are, or placing our own self in a situation that not isn't necessarily even ours to worry about, can really get you to that place of solace when you're removing some of those things off of your plate. And using a roadmap through witchcraft or some of the skills of the occult technologies can certainly lead to some of those things coming off of your plate. If I'm using a divination method of some type, maybe it's about a situation I don't need to worry about it, or it's going to resolve itself in some amount of time. And that way I'm able to move forward and not have that kind of worry weighing on me. And taking those things off is going to heal yourself. And when I hear healing bandied about a lot, witchcraft can heal you, or religion can heal you, or medicine can heal you, or science can heal you, but the healing that I'm talking about here is de-stressing yourself to not worry about every iota of tiny things and all the anxiety that's in there by providing yourself some information through those occult technologies. And by reducing your stress, you reduce the negative effects of stress, thereby healing yourself. So you're seeing a one-to-one kind of relationship here of not just miraculous healing, pray to this god, do these witchcraft things, and then you're healed. You're actively engaged in these kinds of tasks, and that is what heals you. You heal yourself. That's the first altar's power, is the ability to do that. The altar of self, or the first altar, is needs to be maintained and taken care of. And some of that is limiting that stress and dealing with it as it comes up. I'm not saying avoid it. Stress is going to happen constantly. Currently, I'm under a whole bunch of stress as well. This week is extremely difficult because I had a very busy weekend. Moving into this week, I've had no time for downtime, and that is challenging, and there's just stress. And sometimes that's just going to happen. And it's recognizing those things and being good at recognizing those things and then taking the time to sit and pray at an altar, to work with your witchcraft, to give you some guidance and reconnect to yourself. You will achieve these addressed feelings. So these feelings of fulfillment, progression, and solace are generated by you taking control of your own existence. This is where some of the Abrahamic faiths kind of come into conflict, I think, with witchcraft specifically, or any of the pagan practices. Everything good in generally, Abrahamic belief comes from external. It comes from God, if you will. I'm not going to delve into that again right now, but those things come from God. The peace that you get, the solace that you get, the fulfillment is all from an external source. And then where a pagan mindset is coming from is that it's internally generated. I'm in control of that. And this is a profane thought that we are at the level or realm of godhood or deityhood of some kind. And that is one of the many conflicts that exists between pagan beliefs as well as Abrahamic beliefs. And between these two schisms, you can see why some of these arguments start coming up between these two faiths or approaches in philosophy. One that all of the greatness is from within, and the other has to be external. And what we're doing is profane in the sense that we're not honoring that externalization. And again, witchcraft acting as a beacon. Your praxis is a distinct awareness of your progress or contentment. It denotes a stage after instability. So as we become aware of this progress, as we see that progress, we can know that from that we had to come from instability. You'll see this kind of within like dark nights of the soul, for example. We hear that sometimes we hear shadow work. That's the instability. And then there's methods that we use to address those things, whether that's psychosomatic or witchcraft or therapy or just talking with a friend. Those things are what's addressing the challenge and the instability that you have, leading to progress or solace or contentment. And so we're aiming towards that content side, and we want to keep trying to work with that balance. There is no one point that you will be done doing this. You will also revisit many of these things that you thought you already addressed, because it will also continue to be in flux as you go through your life. Rituals and ceremonies are how witches create the demarcations in their own lives. We talk about rituals as really a sequence or series of behaviors that we take to engage in something. And it's a mentalistic cue that engages us. So when I sit and pray at the altar, or when I'm casting a spell or doing divination, these things are all ritualized. And I can utilize those as a demarcation between what is being unstable, creating that perfect environment, at least temporarily, at an altar or in a sacred space, and then utilizing that for that progress or to gain some clarity and being able to stave that off. Ceremonies are the same thing as rituals. However, it denotes a phase change and has a temporal or time component to it. So think of things like birthdays or graduations. There's rituals that are inside of the ceremony. So in birthdays, you have the ceremony of the birthday, and then underneath that, you have within the birthday, there's various things like presents and cake and stories and games and whatever, right? That's the ritualization within the ceremony. Ceremonies that witches have is something akin to like a sabbat. So you would have sabbats that are ceremony, and then within that you'll have the ritualization that's in it, and it denotes these changes. And all of those times that we practice them, these rituals or these ceremonies, or incorporate the two together, either individualistically or together, these are practice times for us to engage in creating these kinds of stable environments and letting these other things that influence our lives to fall away, at least temporarily, to get some of that clarity that we need for aiming towards that fulfillment, contentment, and progress. Spells they shape kind of a narrative in our life. We're telling a story. Spells come in a lot of different forms. It's not just language, it's not just written, it's a lot of different things, but basically you're dictating something, manifesting it into the world. Divination is a tool of discovery, essentially. And in this discovery, and inside of creating these narratives, we can put these two together inside of our rituals, inside of our ceremonies, providing those environments for us to manifest our own will and address some of these unstable points in our existence, some of these challenges or these lack of roadmap, and build that beacon with our witchcraft. In our consideration of when we need to do these things and how we're going to do these things, we partner as witches with the liminal, some in between states, some other fundamental state of existence. One way that witches partner with the liminal is through ritual and ceremony. And so we understand that when we're connecting in that way with ritual and ceremony and spells and divination, it is a way that we are accessing the liminal in our own lives. The liminal's outside of us. It's also a part of us. Again, we're seeing another balance point here, but fundamentally making that connection allows us some of that to borrow some of that stability, some of that instability that also exists within the liminal states. When witches encounter a barrier or they want to establish a direction in their own lives, they can employ occult technologies like spells and divination. They could connect to a natural phase, such as a ritual, and kind of engage in that way, and a stepping stone out of that, or at least temporarily, away from some of that instability. We can also connect to an extranatural entities as another example and get some external information from that and get some other perspective and guidance. Some of that comes from when you're thinking spiritual guides or you're talking transcendental meditation. Those pieces are helping us connect to that liminal state and gain some new perspective on a particular situation that we might be encountering. Positive, negative, destructive, or constructive, it doesn't matter. I mention this very often. I probably need to revisit it, honestly, but using the eyes, the heart, and the hands of a witch, we can identify these former challenges, these directions that we have. And this is basically the reference saying eyes of a witch have to do with the observation that we have, the openness to observation. The heart is how we feel about something and how we approach it, and the hands are what we craft. Literally the witchcraft that we're doing. Do you wave a wand? Do you put a magic circle on the ground? Do you do some alchemy? What are we doing, right? These things are what creates the stable platform of what our witchcraft is, and engaging in those helps us identify some of this direction, to parse out some of the pieces that are not as helpful for us or that are causing some of those distractions or difficulties. Witchcraft can be used to dissolve or break down barriers. And I say that again for emphasis. Witchcraft can be used to dissolve or break down our barriers. When we encounter these barriers, from the rubble, Just like when we see the tower, you see all those things falling off of it, all the bricks and things falling to the ground. It may not be a tower anymore, but you can build a road with this rubble. You pave this new path. Pick up the stones, pick up the detritus, and put them in front of you and go somewhere. Do something with it. Heck, even construct a monument if you want to. If you really want to commemorate the moment, you don't even need to build a road. This act is how you create your solace, your contentment, and your strength by knowing that you, the witch, are able to build this road for yourself. When we're connecting this back to our lives, being a witch means using witchcraft to improve the first altar, then our communities. So through that rubble, that building, that creation, that manifestation that we do, not only are we able to do that for ourselves, but when we're in a stable state, we can do that for other people. But that comes from making us, our first altar, healthy and robust and informed. And by doing that, we can put ourselves in a situation and position ourselves in such a way that we can do that for other people. This is where I think that we get into some of the challenges when you talk about doing spells for other people or writing spells or whatever, because the witch may not be necessarily in a position themselves to be able to offer that, let alone a whole bunch of other considerations that I won't go into. But essentially, how do I do that for somebody else? These are really deep-seated things. I'm creating a ritual for myself to make these demarcations, to develop this roadmap, to commemorate an event, to find this contentment. And then when somebody external to me, witch or otherwise, is saying, hey, can you do a spell for me? They're asking me to do that for them. That's it's not a small ask. And just remember that in your own practices, if you're reaching out to others and you're performing witchcraft for others or on their behalf, that is what you're entailing. Are you in a stable enough position? And are you willing to do that for somebody else and all their baggage and whatever else is going on? Because that's the role you're taking on when you engage in that manner. So do so carefully and at least cautiously would be the best way to phrase that. Our abilities are of the liminal, and they provide insight, such as divination, and influence, such as spells. Witchcraft harnesses these techniques as directed by the witch. Your magic is expressed in these efforts. So as you harness these things, the guidance that you have, that is you doing your witchcraft, and it is how you're expressing your magic. It can expand beyond that. The more that you get into it, the more that you consistently practice, the stronger these relationships get, these patterns become. This is why back in the beginning of this sermon is why I referenced that your instability it can be resolved by your own practice, and that's what is bringing it to you, is by expressing your magic in such a way to resolve the unstable elements. Dissolution is the art of decomposition, signifying the beginning of a process. Alchemists recorded that they start with separation or dissolving in their operations. So when they first start anything, generally speaking, they'll break things down to their primary components and then work from there, from these constituent components, the raw material of those things, whatever that might be. Let us learn from these alchemists and incorporate dissolution into our own lives. One of the foremost statements that we're going to hear is solve coagula. I will make this make sense in a minute. Some of you may already be nodding or understand what this is. It's a Latin phrase, but this is, we want to be one of the most formidable in wielding solve coagula. We hear this, and the foremost primary thing, or at least representation, is in Baphomet. Baphomet encapsulates this very phrase. If you wondered what Baphomet represents, or have heard of this, Eliphas Levi first mentions this construct. Dissolution references, or in part, is a component of solve coagula. Baphomet is the quintessence and paragon of balance, separation, conjoining, and dichotomous virtues of paradox. Baphomet is a very complicated figure. It raises a lot of curiosity in people, sometimes vitriol, sometimes anger, because they don't really understand it. So today, we're going to do an activity and we're going to break down some of what Baphomet represents in their iconic imagery that Eliphas Levi created. Who wants to share what their initial concept of this? What your initial gut reaction to this image is. What do you feel? What's the first emotion that you detect?
Bala says that she sees love. Oscar said danger. For me, I just see familiarity because I've seen this symbol many, many times before. Michelle says, as above, so below, so I can get a sense of peace and balance. Sable says, a teacher.
Okay. And also, you do not are not required, by the way, to respond to this.
And then Rory says, the devil card intro.
Yep. Okay.
Will says, broken symmetry.
That's interesting. Okay. All right. I think that's mostly got most of our people. We'll try and keep an eye on this. All
Yeah, I
right.
think that was everyone.
Baphomet is a very complicated figure and really representation. Much of what everybody has said is, at least in part, some aspect of the Baphomet itself. Let's go ahead. I'm going to break some of this down for us. I don't even know where I want to start with this exactly. Let's start with the as above, so below aspect. It is a term that we hear very frequently within this. So what you're seeing here is if you see the raised, I'm not going to try directionality, but if the one that's pointing up towards the yellow moon, and you see the hand that's pointing towards the black moon, there is a very unique aspect to this. And most people don't catch this, but the arm that's pointing up is a female arm, and the one that's pointing down is a masculine arm specifically. This is what I was talking about where we start seeing this virtuous paradox, right, in between this. Specifically, those moons are representing Chesed and Gabura. There's different concepts. I'm not going to go way into detail with this, but essentially they're talking about mercy and justice and the combination of those things. So when it was mentioned about broken symmetry, you're not technically inaccurate. These two things are not together. The central figure, the Baphomet that you see, is the thing that is connecting those things. It is the connective force. This is kind of why the first altar matters to us, because of the reason that we are the magicians, the witches, that work within these systems and unite that symmetry within it. And then we're going to talk a little bit. So we have these two kind of aspects, this male-female duality, this androgyny that happens. We have this mercy and justice and how those things are balanced together. One of the most prominent things for me is the wild candle on top of this person's head. And specifically, it's the torch, right? It's sometimes represented as a candle. It can be represented as a torch. It kind of just depends. Are similar things, different interpretation of art. But it's referencing the flame of intelligence. It's the magic light of the universal balance. So this is the universal balance that we're creating in our own lives. In Gnostic teachings, you'll hear this referenced as the flame of knowledge or gnosis. And this is a connection specifically between that which is known, the immaterial, the soul, the flame, and then the matter, the candle, the torch itself is the soul and matter coming together. They're not unlinked. You cannot have the flame very well without having a source of some kind. And it's uniting this purpose and symbolizing those. So it's saying, hey, we have light of the soul and we have the material component, and we're uniting those two things. They depend on one another. Do you want to read that?
Yeah, I just didn't want to interrupt you. Sable said torches used to represent education in schools in the UK.
Absolutely, and this has some harkenings. None of these symbols that are here are innately or uniquely attached to this thing. They come from other sources, right? This is a synthesis of one occultist interpretation in a specific system. So you'll see these kinds of symbols everywhere. And there's a reason for why, because these are arcane symbols, old symbols that we reference and are familiar with. And that's where, Gwen, you feel like, oh, I've seen this image a lot. You're not just seeing the Baphomet image, it is all of the iconography that is inside of this. So these symbols are seen over and over and over again in various components in different places in our life. It's not well represented to me, but the face is supposed to be the face of horror, and that is representing the bearing of the weight of sin. I'm not going to go into great detail with that. Look it up. You can read Eliphas Levi on your own. But it's basically that you are bearing the mantle of the weight of difficulty or challenge or barriers in that of our own lives. The rest that are on this are referencing humanity and how that's nurtured. Also, the rod that you see in the center is the caduceus, and this is also about eternal life. And you will see, obviously, the most prominent ones are the tattoos on both arms, Salve and Coagula, or Salve Coagula. Anyways, point being is that Salve is to dissolve, Coagula is to coagulate. If you aren't familiar with alchemy or you're not familiar with chemistry, basically when you break something down and you condense something, it coagulates or combines into something else. So the idea here with Solve Coagula is to break something down to its constituent components and then reshape it into something new. This is our dissolution that we're talking about, breaking these things down in our own lives. And so when we do this dissolution, it gives us this sense of creation, of infinite possibility. This can split either way. But this is why Baphomet has such a paradoxical sort of exposure to it. And it harnesses all of those. Yes, and some of those, it does talk about that. I can read a little bit from where I'm at the moment, but it does talk about some principles of gender. I'm not going to go too far off the rails into that. Um, it is I prefer this image and I take it with the female male aspects or these duality, these polarities that exist, that it's uniting those two things. It doesn't claim one or the other, but requires both of them to be a realized whole. And for me, that's the way that I interpret it, but does have some gendered principles within it. And it could be broken down to be very hardcore one or the other. But I don't see Baphomet as any one specific thing. It is all things, the alpha and omega, if you will. Some people, and this symbol got adopted. You also hear this reference to the Sabbatic goat. But this is very profane to see for anybody who either doesn't understand it, hasn't seen it, has only seen media representations of it, or is in an Abrahamic place of reference because you're claiming that you can know all of the things, that you yourself can balance and be all of these things, unite these disparate pieces and bring them together. And that is a very challenging perspective when you're talking about external perspectives that your power is not your own, it is of an external source. It got incorporated, this symbol specifically was incorporated in some of the artistry of Tarot, which is why it gets represented with the devil in that of itself. Also, the ties of Mercury to this, by the way, so like Mercury and Quicksilver and all of that came later after this image by MacGregor Mathers. And he tied Baphomet with the Mercury aspect to it. And so I reference Baphomet if you ever see me using sigils or whatever in like alchemical circles that we use, you'll often see me use specifically Mercury to represent Baphomet. And the reason is because it's breaking down and combining certain things in our life. This is the penultimate creator and destructor of all things because of the reason that it understands all of the extremes and then unites them together. The magician very much, if you look at it, and remind me if I may be misremembering this, but specifically in the Rider-Waite Tarot set, the magician is making this same pose specifically of as above and so below. And it's about uniting those two pieces together into one aspect. The pentagram, I'm not going to bother explaining because we all are probably familiar with it. Figure it out on your own. If you have questions, you can definitely ask me about that. Or you can email the church about that as well. Does anybody have any questions about what Baphomet kind of is, or what symbols may not have been talked about that you have some curiosity about?
I would take advantage of this. Well, the reason why I say danger is because I've always been told, even from other witches, to be careful around him. But like, what kind of deity is he? Because I get so many like left and like so many people saying he's pure evil, so many people say he's pure good. Like he's supposed to be like in the middle. He's supposed to be like light and shadow, like the Indian gods.
Yes, and I think it's about interpretation, and it depends on what system you're working with too. Um, Meaning specifically that if you don't, if okay, so Gnostics, right? We'll see the symbol, and it's in a character of a lot of different components and philosophies unified into a symbol, the Sabbatic goat. Some have used this symbol, for example, in inverted pentagrams, and they've used that for satanic purposes or devil worship. And so there gets to be a lot of conflation around what this symbol is. It depends also because if you think about Welsh witchcraft, they talk about Buca Du and Buca Gwydr, the white and black god, and you talk about that balance. And not only do you see it there, you also see it in the Holly King and the Oak King, two different pieces of that as well. But you're seeing these kinds of dualities. Some people may reference Baphomet as an actual deity. Some may take it as simply a representation. Some take it as a ritualistic devil archetype that they may utilize in their worship as well. I think it comes down to a lot of misunderstanding and misrepresentation. Some of it is straight up that people deify this and they do take it that as an evil aspect. But in any one specific, so for example, if you think about the Ars Goetia, just say the Keys of Solomon, right? So Ars Goetia, Ars Polina, all of that stuff. There's no reference to really Baphomet as a deity. Baphomet is an artistic concept and could be deified, such as an egregore or something along those lines, and then worshipped in lieu of that. If you were to take this as a devil aspect, you would have to first accept that the devil and Satan exists in the way that Abrahamic Christianity tells us that the devil exists and Satan exists, which is its own challenge. Um, but anything can necessarily be deified in whatever way, and you can kind of reference that in my extranatural entities sermon. I hope that gave you some clarity and answered your question.
Yeah, I did.
Cool. I have a question over there that says, how is this related to children? I am unclear how to answer that question. I don't see a lot of children. I mean, there's the unification of this, but it doesn't necessarily point out child aspects. Some of the artistic license that was taken, so take, for example, the main statue that has both children on either side of the Baphomet. Those two are basically the pure wonder, and those can be taken from a lot of perspectives, but the pure wonder of children, of just accepting Baphomet for what it is with no sort of baggage or attached meaning to it, and just going at this thing with this kind of wonder and openness. What are the words on the planet? Ah, yeah, it's just symbolizing who created this thing. You can look this up, and he wrote all about this, and it's specifically about his system that this kind of got created. Look up at Eliphas Levi. See what systems incorporate this. You may see this in Theosophy. You may see this in Gnosticism. You'll see this in Satanic and Satanism. Right. And then Michelle is just saying that it helps to understand kind of what this is about children and how it's the protector of children. I just didn't know the origin. This is the original image as far as I understand. And keep in mind this is colorized. To be fair, it's not a woodcut. It's just a colorized image. Besides the point, the children came in later as other interpretations as Baphomet made its way through the centuries. And then we got that kind of combination. But Genesis would also be part of that. Personally, if I'm thinking children, if you're thinking about the end and the beginning of something, the synthesis has to happen. If you're breaking something down, or if you're combining constituent components, and then you're ending with children, it's a synthesis of those components. Michelle said that made sense. And then we have another question. What's the meaning of the caduceus and golden arch in the very center? That is genitals, just as a side note. But it is about eternal life, basically, and the creation of those things. Scales and feathers also have a different representation, and they can have different meanings depending on what system you're in. Some of the scales is also reference about kind of the armor or protection of that specific space. It can also be a reference to the animalistic nature, which is why you see the goat head and the hooves and the humanity, that it's animalism as well as humanity that is also combined. Man is an animal of some kind, and removing ourselves from that is very challenging. And it's kind of our hubris that we're above animals in some way or other, but we're all a part of it. And so it's representing some of those combinations. Hopefully that provides some insight as to what Baphomet can represent and where you might find this thing in that of itself. There are entrenched patterns or habits that change by identifying them, and it's followed by dissolution. Witches use witchcraft to assist in identification, finding these barriers and finding that identification of what that challenge is and what we're going to do about that challenge or barrier. We leverage spellcraft to manifest our will. We cast these spells to manifest will into this plane. You can also look this up on Thaumaturgy and Theurgy on your own. They are on our YouTube channel as well. We leverage divination to clarify our barriers. It could be of any sort. It could be pendulums. It could be, casting lots. It could be omens. It could be any number of things. But all of those divination methods clarify what these barriers are, what our next roadmap is going to be, and through spellcraft, we're able to manifest our will with that information. Dissolution breaks apart our barriers. So our idea is that this illusion is meant to break down those barriers into their components so that they're easier to deal with. In a class for psychology, I think it was trauma psychology, it said name it to tame it is one phrase that you may have heard before, but knowing what something is, seeing what those pieces are about, helps us break down these things. Much like if you take, if you want to eat an elephant, you take a bite at a time. It makes it a lot easier, right? So we're breaking these down to these simpler components to be able to deal with them and sort out what's happening for us because our lives are very complicated. Ironically, the Devil card in Tarot not only identifies and portrays barriers, such as Baphomet and that artistry, but it also possesses the innate knowledge of all things related to barriers. So that's the resolution as well as the cause of barriers. If you know one thing all the way, you generally know the opposite of that thing. And breaking those components down in that card, it helps us, it reminds us of just not only that there are barriers, but also the knowledge of what those barriers are innately. Use dissolution to your advantage. I have said frequently, that which is void seeks to be filled, and that which is filled seeks to be void. So if we have our lives filled up with all of these kinds of instabilities, it wants to resolve itself. Go with that natural flow. It will help you in the efforts of resolving or addressing those kinds of challenges or barriers in your own life. And if you are already filled with any of these things and you get to that void space, you can put new things in its place, more stability, fulfillment, contentment within that space that is now more stabilized. From a place without boundary, witches co-create the next space. Sometimes they do this together, sometimes they do it separate from one another. You can do this together or individually. The liminal itself has no known boundaries as far as I'm aware. And that gives it the ability to create and destroy equally. And that's what we're using in that space, however you connect to it, to create your next space, to create that stability in conjunction and in partnership with that liminal space. I want you to wield dissolution with care as well as prudence, because breaking things down just to break things down doesn't really help a lot. And without some sort of idea of why we're doing that, it doesn't help. And also, if you're doing this on behalf of other people when you're not necessarily in a place to do so, can cause even more problems in that of itself. So wield this dissolution, this breaking down with care and prudence as you're engaging with it. Become the being, the witch that harnesses virtuous paradox like the Baphomet does. You have these things in you. Balance them, utilize them, be aware of their extremes. If you're going to one extreme or the other, just be aware that you're going to one of these extremes. And to be cognizant that coming back from those places can be a little challenging, and trying to get to that center aligned point like the Baphomet is in the midst of all of this difference and paradox that's happening, that's where we're going to find our strongest, most potent witchcraft available to us. The best witchcraft is done through dissolution to produce potency and efficacy. So the more that we can break down and understand these parts of our own lives through the eyes, heart, and hand of a witch, using these principles of spellcraft and divination, we can take those things and become more potent and efficacious in our own lives, bringing us that fulfillment, contentment, and solace that many of us are seeking. And every era, even this one, has its own challenges and is fraught with problems and difficulties. We're definitely experiencing a heightened amount of those at the moment, especially in the Western world, and now somewhat in the Asian world as well. Some of these things should come up for you, and some of them may stress you out or make you really on edge. And be aware of these things and whether or not that's really harnessing or helping you tend your first altar and engage in your practice in a way that is meaningful and producing the results that you want. Casting magic, doing witchcraft is about creating your own realities, knowing these barriers, knowing yourself, and coming to some sort of either calm state or some forward progressive state. So remind yourself of the Baphomet when you're in these kinds of perilous states of extremes that you might be experiencing, or these stressful times in your own lives.